The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Jesus said to the chief priests and the elders of the people, "Hear another parable. There was a landowner who planted a vineyard, put a hedge around it, dug a wine press, and built a tower. Then he leased it to tenants and went on a journey. When vintage time drew near, he sent his servants to the tenants to obtain his produce. But the tenants seized the servants, and one they beat, another they killed, and the third they stoned. Again he sent other servants, more numerous than the first ones, but they treated them in the same way. Finally he sent his son to them, thinking, 'They will respect my son.' But when the tenants saw the son, they said to one another, 'This is the heir. Come, let us kill him and acquire his inheritance.' So they seized him, threw him out of the vineyard, and killed him. What will the owner of the vineyard do to these tenants when he comes?" They answered him, "He will put those wretched men to a wretched death and lease his vineyard to other tenants who will give him the produce at proper times." Jesus said to them, "Did you never read in the scriptures, 'The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone'? By the Lord this has been done, and it's wonderful in our eyes. Therefore I say to you, the kingdom of God will be taken away from you and given to a people who will produce its fruit." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Many of us have memories of our youth which are still painful when we recall them. It may have been a verbal taunt, being called pimple face or zit head or fats. At least those were some of the taunts in my day. It may have been not being accepted into a club or on a team or into a friendship group. The experience was one of rejection and humiliation. It is so important for youngsters and even adults to fit in. We crave acceptance. We yearn to be liked. We spend lots of time being attracted. We make sure that we have the right clothes, hairstyle, and material objects that help to assure acceptance. We do not want to be rejected. The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone of a whole new world, Jesus said. This is the promise of Matthew's gospel today. How can rejection be promising? Rejection hurts. It can scare us, make us feel second-rate, make us feel on the outside. And who has not experienced rejection? As the old song goes, there are at least 50 ways to leave your lover. Employees are passed over for promotions. laid off, or fired. We try hard to get the job we want, but we're not hired. There are silent rejections. When a smile or a welcome or a compliment are not offered at an appropriate moment. We find ourselves sometimes in situations we can't control. Sometimes we do the rejecting. Sometimes we are the ones rejected. Some rejections we just have to accept. Others we have to struggle against. The basic decision, however, is whether to accept or reject the life which God offers us. This morning's gospel summarizes the history of the Israelites, God's people. It's a story of acceptance, rejection, and wider acceptance as applied to the early church. In the story, the owner of the vineyard is God. The vineyard itself is the Israelite people. The tenants are the leaders of the people. The servants are the prophets. And the Son is Jesus. It's a story of rejection and infidelity. Because of it, the Gentiles, the non-Jews, are accepted into God's kingdom. They're accepted even though some of these same Gentiles, along with Jewish leaders, had actually executed Jesus. We, the church, inherit God's vineyard and the warning against infidelity. We inherit God's acceptance, His love, His caring, but we also inherit the infidelity and the sin, the hatred and the bitterness, and the violence and the pain that are at work among us. We need only to think of the people who have experienced the violence of nature, the hurricanes, the floods, the earthquakes, and one yesterday in Afghanistan. We only need to think of the victims of gun violence all over our country, now in Israel. We only need to think of those things and our hearts ache. God continues, however, to dig, to plant, to clear, and to oversee those He loves. We, in turn, are challenged to a faithful response to these gifts. There's a story of an army private who was a Christian. Every night before going to sleep, he knelt beside his cot to pray. And his sergeant sneered at this activity. And one night the sergeant came in drunk, and he found a private at prayer, and he kicked him across the room. When the sergeant awoke the next morning, he found his boots freshly polished at the foot of his bed. The sergeant went to the private and said, "Tell me about this God of yours." When we feel rejected or broken, we're invited to go to God who rejects no one. It's good to remind ourselves that God uses broken things. It takes broken soil to produce a crop, broken clouds to give rain, broken grain to make bread, crushed grapes to make wine. It takes broken bread and poured out wine to make us whole. When our hearts are broken, we know our need. Jesus said, "This is my body broken for you. This is my blood poured out for you. Take and eat. Take and drink." We know the experience of rejection and brokenness, but we're never alone in that experience. For Christ is always with us, and his promise to us also calls us to be there for others who are feeling broken or rejected. For it's our solidarity with one another that leads to wholeness and healing. And the promise of the gospel is ours. And that promise is the stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone for a whole new world.